I would like to answer some of these questions because I noticed two questions from our viewers, and they're very related questions in regards to the Democrat presidential candidates. One of the questions is, who, in our opinion, do we think would be the best Democrat candidate? And this is interesting. It's a hard question for me to answer because I'm not shy about this. I'm not particularly fond of any of them. I will say that probably of all of them, I would go for Tulsi Gabbard, if only for her stances on foreign policy. In terms of domestic policy, I don't like really any of their policies. I think that they all want to increase spending and the federal government too much. But Tulsi seems to be the most moderate of all of them, and also the most open. The rest of them, I believe, are a little bit too partisan.
I would agree there.
And so I would say Tulsi Gabbard for me. Who do you?
I like Tulsi Gabbard. I also do like Andrew Yang, and there are definitely a few things that I strongly disagree with him on. Very skeptical of UBI. I like who Andrew Yang is as a personality.
I would
as
love to spend
individual.
a whole episode talking about UBI one day.
Sure, absolutely. Regarding Andrew Yang, I think that he's got the type of forward thinking that I would see in somebody who's open-minded. He looks like somebody who will be willing to work in a bipartisan way. Now, there are some candidates that clearly will not do that. I don't think Kamala Harris is. I mean, as long as we're talking about the picks that we like, and those are probably the two best ones there.
The other question was, who do we think the worst candidate is? Which we can
Fantastic.
Get into that. Yeah. So,
all right.
That is actually, I think, a more difficult question to answer than the first one.
It's a more entertaining one in some ways. There is so much to poke fun at.
Yeah.
We can start with. Well, why don't I start off with Bernie, right?
Yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing. Although I'm actually not 100% if he is the worst. And this is where I might disagree with you slightly, because I actually think that it could be Andrew Yang, although I want to like him. I think that his policies would actually be the worst, if only because he wants to do pretty much everything Bernie wants to do and more in regards to UBI. But they're pretty much all for Medicare for all. They all want healthcare for everyone. I'm not 100% on whether or not Bernie has, or on what stance Bernie has on immigration, but I know many of them want to essentially decriminalize illegal crossings, meaning that people coming across the country illegally would not be detained, effectively creating an open borders policy.
There are some people farther left, specifically like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who think that illegal immigrants should have the right to vote as well. And there's like a very, very clear conflict of interest right there. Yeah. You're not only letting people come into the country illegally, now you're not going to arrest them for it, and you're going to let them vote. And who do you think they're going to vote for?
Well, they're going to vote for the people who are going to let them stay illegally. They want to give them the right to vote. They also want to give them free health care as well. They want to extend all social benefits to everyone who comes in illegally, and they want to let in as many people come in illegally as they want, which, as we've stated before, there are economic downsides to that. There are also national security risks to that. So there are a lot of reasons why that is a bad idea. And it's hard to say who exactly is the worst, because for the most part, they all tend to agree. There are some moderates in the party, but of those who are of the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and even Andrew Yang class, they all tend to agree on these issues for the most part.
So some important distinctions I will make about just some of these candidates. So Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are, I believe, the only two candidates running that would like to abolish private health care. So under their universal health care system, you would not have your private health care provider. Bernie's been pretty honest about that, very straightforward in Bernie Sanders fashion. He's not going to sugarcoat much of what he says. And Elizabeth Warren has been very, very different on that. I think she lost a lot of respect.
Bernie is much more honest in what he wants to do than she is.
Well, he's more honest, but he's also less fearful in a lot of ways. Like Bernie does not seem to put it this way. He doesn't mind a picture with a bad hair day. Okay, so Bernie's willing to get his hands a little bit dirtier. It seems he's willing to be a little bit more...
Very similar to Trump in some ways.
Well, they had the same...
I think a debate between them would be very interesting.
I wouldn't call him as bombastic as Trump, but he's got that same...
He's got that energy.
Energy, right. Yeah. So I wanted to point that out about those two candidates specifically. Actually, adding on to that, their wealth tax is something we can mention. So one of the reasons I feel
like we're going into all their policies.
I promise I'll try to not make it too long, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can go for days about this, but going into really just like the main the key points that were I think the Achilles heel of some of these campaigns, and I think Bernie's and Warren's will be their healthcare plan as well as this wealth tax. Now, there's a clear issue with a wealth tax. Let's assume you have let's say you have $2 million in wealth, right? The businesses you own, the properties you own, etc., and you earn $100,000 a year. So if I put some type of wealth tax on your $2 million, one of two things happens. You either can afford to spend from that tax out of your income, essentially meaning that your income goes towards that, so you're not really making money. Perhaps you're making money, assuming the wealth tax is low enough, but I would doubt that. Right now we're looking at projections that would essentially have the people at the top 1% losing 95% of their income that they would make in that year.
There are a variety of plans. This is another thing that I would love to talk about, and another thing that we could spend a whole episode talking about.
We probably should spend a whole episode talking about this.
I do want to move on to the next question, which is, do you think President Trump will be reelected, and if so, why? And this is a complicated question. Well, I mean, it's a simple question. I think the simple answer is yes.
Right.
I think he will be reelected. But why he will be reelected, that's a lot more complex. Mostly, I think that he will be reelected because right now it seems that the majority of the energy in the Democrat Party is with the far left wing. That being said, Joe Biden is the front runner in the election. But once those numbers start to get whittled down and the far left energy gets behind one candidate, whether that's Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, I think they might actually have enough to beat him in a primary. And actually, Joe Biden's numbers in some of these early states, like in Iowa, don't look that great. And one of the big arguments that is made for Joe Biden is that he is arguably the most electable candidate. So if he starts losing states in primaries, it's going to do a lot to hurt faith in his campaign.
Yeah.
And if he ends up not getting the nomination and we end up getting a further left candidate, I think a lot of people will end up voting for Trump. A lot of moderates will end up voting for Trump because I just don't think that there is that much support for these more far left agendas that they are promoting.
And keep in mind also something to about 40% of people don't vote. So that's something that you can add to part of that. I think Trump will win as well. And if I gave a short explanation as to why, maybe just 3 one-sentence answers, people don't want a politician right off the bat. That no one wants to vote for an establishment politician, corruption and all that. Nobody wants to vote for anyone who's already in the political landscape. So that'd be my first. My second would be that
Andrew Yang has the best chance to beat him.
Which is, I would agree. He's a businessman, and his views seem to be the most marketable. In a lot of ways.
He's also very personable.
Probably
personable. The most personable. Even though I disagree with a lot of his policies, like I've said before, I really want to like the guy.
Well, so personability does matter to some degree.
Yeah.
Because is he going to seek out the approval of people that don't approve of him already? I think the answer is yes. With somebody like Trump, the answer is more like a no. Right? Trump doesn't seem to be trying to get approval from people that don't like him.
Yeah, well, that's virtually impossible is the other thing.
That is but agreed. I'll concede that. But he also doesn't seem to be trying that hard to turn people to his side, right? Andrew Yang seems like somebody who would be better at that. The math pin that he wears, I think that he's somebody with where sensibility and common sense is at the core. I think that if he sees that on paper his policies will not work, I think that he'll abandon those policies.
Yeah, I think that he's
because he's not a politician.
I think that he's certainly reasonable enough to listen to criticism.
Is he reasonable enough to say that he was wrong? Because we think some of his policies won't work.
Yeah.
And
I think it really depends on how you present the argument to him, and I'm not sure how many counter arguments he has heard to some of his policies, but I definitely think that he is someone who could be convinced, and that's important.
Yeah, that is incredibly important. I mean, you can look at somebody like Kamala Harris. She does not want to be convinced. Mm-hmm. She's already had her wallet convince her, so she's well checked on that. Doesn't have to worry about being convinced. Another, probably, in my opinion, one of the worst candidates that we could get. Actually, at least Bernie and Elizabeth Warren have a heart.
Yeah,
I mean, Kamala Harris is. Here's the question they should be asking: Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris? Which would you vote for?
That's when you put it in that light, it's like really bad, man.
That's it gives you some perspective. Like, whoa, don't compare her to Hillary because they look way too similar.
Yeah,
they both look like they have every line rehearsed. They're both incredibly polished, long-standing politicians.
A little bit awkward when they try to make jokes.
Yeah, you can clearly see that their smiles and idiosyncrasies are fake. Kind of like Cory Booker. You can tell that him always doing this and keeping his eyes super. He
tries too hard.
You can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
And that's the thing. I mean, if we're really going to talk about the people who have the best chance of beating Trump, I think it's.
How about
Andrew
the ones
Yang.
that aren't trying to manipulate us? That might be a good start, right? So we'll scratch off Cory Booker.
Getting spicy there.
I mean, look, we're talking about politics.
We are.
And there is a fine line between acting a certain way and presenting yourself a certain way because you think that's how you should conduct yourself. I see that as standards. It's totally different when you're one person and try to market yourself as a totally different one because you know that it'll pull certain strings.
That's actually one of the reasons why.
That's manipulation.
That's one of the reasons why I respect Bernie despite how much I disagree with him because he's very authentic. He has been saying and arguing for the same things for decades. So you know that he believes in what he's saying. Regardless of whether you think he's right or wrong, you know that he actually stands for something, which is something you can't say for a lot of the people on that stage.
Just because I mentioned that I was going to give 3 points there. Things are working under Trump. That's one reason people will vote for him, and I think that he'll win, right? Just simple enough. People see things that are working. They don't pay attention to politics at all, but things are working, so they vote for the same guy. They're those people. People don't want a politician. And especially minorities in this country have learned to notice when politicians are trying to pander to us. Mm-hmm. We've gotten good at that.
It's actually ironic because Kamala Harris does not have a lot of black support, and Joe Biden has the most.
Well, yeah,
because you can
make
argue
of that
why
what
that
you will,
is,
right? Yeah.
But people are the pandering game doesn't work as well as I think some of these politicians think that it does.
Yeah,
people can see through the empty promises.
I have coworkers, very close friends, people that I've lived with who are trans. I'm bisexual myself. Kamala Harris getting on stage and saying my pronouns are her and hers. It doesn't help anyone. That's not a contribution to the trans society. That doesn't help anybody. You didn't contribute anything to anyone. You just made it very clear that you have certain views. It's virtue signaling.
It is. And
I see something like that, and I don't see somebody who seeks to support me and protect my rights. I see somebody who wants my vote. And that to me is offensive. To me, that's a lot of minorities have had this mentality. We've seen politician after politician. Communities have seen politicians pass for 20, 30 years and have become totally numb to the idea of a new politician. Red and blue looks the exact same to a lot of these people. But the one thing they notice is when somebody is genuine and when they're not.
Yeah. And
that's what somebody will always see through the end of it. That's why Hillary didn't win. That's why I think Kamala won't win.
Yeah.
It's part of why Beto dropped out. And I mean, we could talk about how he'd probably be one of the. Beto might actually been the answer to that. He might have been the absolute worst candidate.
If he were still in the race, I would have said.
If Beto. He was still in the race, because he's the only one that was almost guaranteed to start a civil war. Trying to send police officers to people's houses and have them take their guns, confiscate guns.
He openly said that he would do that, and that's not going to fly in a lot of states.
Frankly, he probably lost a lot of support from members of the law enforcement community for that.
I don't think he ever had that much support from them to begin with.
If he had any to begin with, proportionately, it must have dropped. You know, I mean, what law enforcement officer wants to be tasked to go home to home to tell people that you have to give your guns up to me?
Well, you know, there are a lot of law enforcement officers who probably would refuse. For example, in Colorado, they try to do pretty much the exact same thing. And there are several counties in Colorado that are gun sanctuary zones where the police will not enforce the gun restrictions and confiscation laws that they've tried to pass there. Yeah. So even if they try to pass these laws confiscating guns, it's very likely that many law enforcement jurisdictions would refuse to enforce those laws. So he would have to send federal agents to accomplish this, and that's only going to cause way more tension. Absolutely.
Yeah. And now what happens when members of a community who are in law enforcement, but they're members of this community, seeing other members of their community getting stripped of their arms? Do you think they're going to stand for it? Do you think the community is going to expect their local police to let that fly? And do you think the local police will? Because at that point, you could have disagreement. I would hesitate to say conflict. I'd hope not, right? Fingers crossed, knock on wood.
Yeah.
But there could definitely be some disagreement between law enforcement and federal agents there.
Well, fortunately, Beto has dropped out, so this is not going to happen unless other people try and take up his cause. Although, we should get to this last question, and I think this is going to be the last question that we answer, and we'll end the stream. Someone asked, do we think Trump has a heart?
It's a good question. It's actually, I mean, it's not necessarily politically relevant, but I think a candidate's character matters. Well, I don't like Trump's character often enough.
My instinct is to answer this question sarcastically and say that if he didn't, he would be dead. But but you know, I understand where you're coming from with this question. I think you're asking if he's empathetic or if he's caring, and I think that he is. It's just that Trump is very combative, and that is the side that we see of him the most because he's constantly under attack. But I have seen many instances in which Trump has displayed genuine caring for other people.
A lot of people have compared Trump to a stern father. That's often been like the comparison made, because he's not going to sugarcoat your mistakes, and he doesn't. He'll tell you messed up, kick you in the boot, and tell you to get back up and continue on and fix it. And he might, he might
not say it in the best way.
But he does it because he cares. Yeah. Now, that's not, I'm not saying that that's exactly who Trump is. But a lot of people see that, and that's what a lot of people...
That's the vibe they get from him.
And a lot of people are attracted to that.
Yeah.
They get this sense that he's a strong figure, almost a paternal figure for a lot of people. So that's definitely, that we want to talk about if he has a heart. A lot of people are, would say yes. He's just not expressive about...
He's not as articulate as he could be, and that does work against him.
Well, it's easy to look like you have a heart when you say that you care about a certain group of people, but people don't. You don't perceive that the same way when you're talking about your care for an issue. Like Trump says that he cares about illegal immigration and stopping, the situation on our border. People hear that and think, okay, so he cares about his objective and whatever. But I don't think that they understand that is also caring for people. Like the people who are sent across the border often get hurt along their way. And if they get hurt in this country, in the United States, they might not want to go to law enforcement because they're in this country. There are a lot of complications to that. You're not making anyone's life easier by letting them into a country illegally. You're not giving them a good life by forcing them to live a life of crime. This doesn't help anyone. So empathy is something that you see very clearly when people talk about people, but not when they talk about issues. You know, Trump talking about how we need to be more independent as a country, him producing tariffs and changing the international environment to benefit the United States. Some people will see that and say that's proof he doesn't care about people, and other people will say no, that's proof that he cares about me
as an American
more than other people. That he cares about me because we're his people. We voted for him. Yeah, he's our leader. You want your leader to care about you more than other people. But, you know...
This goes a little bit into the conflict between the ideas of nation states and empires, which is... That's a whole thing that we could really go into. And that's a very philosophical discussion about what the role of our country should be in the world.
Right.
And also an argument over what is realistic. And that's something that we simply do not have the time to go into.
Agreed. Yeah, that's a whole segment on its own.
Yeah.